Ladies, thank you so much for being here. I know that we just have a knack for talking about uncomfortable things. Seriously,
yeah.
This is just kind of our thing, what we do. And once again, we're going to talk about something that I feel is almost like a plague that women battle, that women, are faced with. And it's something that causes us to remain hidden.
Yeah.
It's something that really does imprison us, and it keeps us from freedom, I believe, more so than anything else. And that, of course, is shame. So that's what this series is going to be about. That's what we're going to talk about. And really just to get us going in this, I want us just to be vulnerable and just share from our own personal experiences of shame, because I think that that's really that opens doors for other women to be able to hear from other women their stories of shame. And it doesn't even have to be like, oh, my situation is exactly the same. It's just upon hearing other women voice it and be able to say, this is what it used to do. This is the power it held over me, but it no longer does. And now I can actually talk openly about it. I think that will really help encourage women to pursue that freedom, from their shame, and really to have that lifted off of them as well.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of the goal of this first video, is just to share our own, personal stories with shame. And really what I had wanted to do is kind of give context for this, because I know a lot of us experience shame for the first time in childhood. And I think you, Tabi, were even saying that, childhood shame tends to look a little bit different than adulthood shame.
Yes.
So I'm going to allow us to just talk either way. Like if you have an example from childhood that you want to share, that's great. If you have something, from adulthood, that's fine as well. I will start by sharing it's one of the first times I feel like I truly experienced shame as a result of my own sin. Whereas a lot of times in childhood, I think we experience shame because somebody has made us feel shameful by the way they talk to us or, something. And we didn't even necessarily do anything sinful. Right. But this is from my own sin. So I had turned 21, and very soon after turning 1, I went to Las Vegas and eloped and got married. And I was not walking with the Lord. I did not know Jesus at this time at all. So I really didn't have, my morals weren't high.
Me too.
They weren't even really there. I didn't have really any regard for people, for guys, anything like that. So this is really just kind of the brink of my craziness and extremely sexually immoral, life that I ended up going into. So went to Las Vegas, got married, eloped, came back to Colorado for a little bit, and we lived together for about 3 months, and then that was it. That was kind of the end of the marriage. But in that time, in those 3 months, I ended up cheating on my husband. And for me, I had always cheated on any guy that I was in a relationship with. There was no morals. There was no integrity, nothing like that, no appreciation for relationships. But this time, after it happened, I felt shame. And I had never really felt shame for doing these kinds of things. I'd never felt that. So whatever it was in that moment, maybe it was just because I was married, even though I didn't see marriage as this, as a covenant between a man and a wife, I still think it was even in that place, even though I wasn't walking with the Lord.
Core,
and I felt it big time. And I remember thinking what is this? Because I've never felt anything like this before. And it was like a damnation almost. It was bad. It was really bad. So that's kind of one of my first, times of truly feeling shame based off of something that I did wrong. How I dishonored my husband. I truly did. So, yeah, fun times, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah. It's interesting that you talk about how that kind of catapulted you into more sin, right? Because I feel like the story that kind of sticks out for me, a lot of my shame when I think about very vivid feeling of shame is tied to drinking and sexuality and stuff like that. And for me, the one that really came to mind was like what kind of catapulted me like out of that scene.
Okay.
But similar kind of stuff. And there was just like a night where I had broken up with a boyfriend, but we were still sleeping together. And then I was also kind of seeing this other guy and sleeping with him too. And it was coming off of this like years of just kind of like hopping around friend groups and just kind of like what I consider like chasing the high of like different friends, different parties, going to concerts, and always kind of escalating things a little bit to like be like, well, that doesn't feel fun anymore, but if I do this, maybe that'll be more fun.
Yes.
And I just hit a point where I was pushing boundaries that night sexually that I normally wouldn't, but it was one of those things where I didn't know what else to do and nothing was making me feel good anymore. And I just remember waking up the next morning and I was late for work because it was a season of like, I don't have to go home early if I work at 6 a.m. I can do it all.
You just stay up until 6 a.m.
Yeah, exactly. So I slept through my alarm, woke up and was just like mortified and was like, what am I doing with myself? But it was just one of those things that I was just feeling like so low, and it was like all of a sudden all of that was like right here in my face, and I was like, what is this? Like, how did I get here, and how can I like get out of here kind of thing. So that was like this big moment of like, I don't know, it's like, yeah, that blast in my face of like everything was right there, and I'm like, this isn't working. So that's probably what sticks out the most for me.
These are such fun stories
I
to
know.
share.
Like I said, right? This is so comfortable.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not sweating, you're sweating.
I actually am. Yeah, I feel like my story that comes to mind is a little bit different just in terms of my relationship with Jesus. I grew up in the church, so I had this idea of sin and redemption and just like God and humanity and all of that. But I think most of my shame came just from like I was living this duplicitous life, like the duplicity and hypocrisy of like hiding. And so my memories of feeling shame are all around, as an adult at least, my addictive behavior around food and just eating disorder and hiding the actual like acting out of what I did. And I got caught in this trap of like being vulnerable and thinking that that would bring me freedom, or like at least I was being like honest, like, well, I struggle with this, and so I'm not hiding it, you know.
Right.
But then I would still be hiding all of these actual behaviors, and like I would act out and then feel just like the soul crushing like hatred of myself. And I feel like that shame, eventually I was like, I'm losing so much by continuing to hide this, that it was like full transparency of like, this is what I'm actually doing, this is what I'm actually struggling with, that finally like broke the power of shame, because I wasn't like living this like double life, you know.
Right.
So
Yeah, and that's the hardest thing to do, is to expose our sin, which usually is it's the premise of our shame. I feel like there are two different types of shame that we can feel, which, we'll talk about later in the series. But more often than not, shame stems from sin. And so until we're honest about our sin and just put it out there and expose it, there really isn't any way to enter into that freedom, because it still has power over us.
Yes.
So long as we keep parts of it hidden and tucked away, and it's like, I'll share this much, but I'm going to protect this over here.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if you knew it all,
Yes.
you would know.
And that's the lie of shame, is like, if I were to be fully known, there's no way I could still be fully loved.
Exactly.
Like, so
Yes.
it's that's why it's so heavy and so like imprisoning.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
like, it feels like there's no win, but Jesus says there is.
Yes.
God.
Yes.
Right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting here.
Yes.
I mean, none of
truly.
us, we'd still be buried in our shame.
Yes.
So I guess then coming back to just, our first really, or not even our first experiences with shame, but just these, very impactful. Like, we remember these because it was big, and it left an impression on us. So when you felt your shame, like when I felt my shame, how did I respond to it? And that's kind of where we want to go with this. So how did we respond out of our shame? And so for me, it was like you were saying, here I had an opportunity to examine my life and be like, what am I doing? Maybe this isn't right, because I'm feeling this way, and this is not a good way to feel. But instead of doing that, I use that to like push me further into sin, and my life just spiraled out of control even more. Yeah. That was at the age of 21, and I mean, my lowest low came, when I was 25, before I was saved. So it was another additional 4 years of just epic immorality. But that moment, which shame could have allowed me to turn, it should lead us to repentance, but it didn't. Right. Instead, it led me further into sin and just being like, I don't want to feel this. I don't want anything. And I learned how to just shut my emotions down. It became, it really just robbed me of the opportunity to turn my life around. Yeah. So I don't know if how that ended up, for you ladies.
Yeah, I feel like mine's been like a continual story, because in all of that, there is this like element of like how I'm finding worth and joy in everything from my body or from sexuality and stuff like that. And so there was where it was like all in my face, and I was like, I need to do something about this. And part of that was like, I need better morals. I don't know where to go, so I guess I'll start going to church. So in some ways, it was a really good, like almost like God calling me to Him through that. But then in that, there was still just like pieces of it that kept having to be like unpacked, like you said, because it was one thing to be able to be like, this happened, but then from that point on, like my life changed and everything was better. But it wasn't, there was still like, I mean, a few years after that, another incident where I got drunk and ended up sleeping with someone, and I was even more mortified, because at that point I like understood what I was doing, and even though that wasn't necessarily a conscious choice that I made in that moment, it was still just something where the learning experience for me in the middle of all that ugliness was like, I was relying on myself as I would never, instead of being like, God, I'm a sinful person, like, help me in this. But even today, I can still see how all of that still affects me in my marriage. I'd like to think like, oh yeah, we waited till marriage, so everything once we started having sex was amazing and all that kind of stuff. But I still feel like the crud from that shame and everything still popping into my marriage, to where it's like, I just struggle with how to take something that I looked at so broken and bring it into something where it's okay now, and not and just feel like comfortable. And my husband's great. He is so patient with me, but there's still just stretches where I'm like, I just don't know how to like be into that, because there's so much brokenness wrapped up into it. And so even in that, it's like, that's something that I want to hide and be like, no, we have a great marriage. We waited till marriage to have sex with each other, and now like everything's peachy keen,
Our sex life is blessed and beautiful and amazing.
And we like know each other so well. We are so known, But it's like, but in reality, it's like, no, there's still a lot of that shame wrapped up in that of like, I don't know, even just like a performance in that of like, I don't know how to just show up as me and not as what I think I should be showing up as in this like sexual relationship. So there's lots of layers to this shame.
So many layers. I feel like because I did know God, like I knew characteristics of God, but I don't think I trusted them, because otherwise I wouldn't have hid. And so my response to shame was always hiding, like more hiding, or more self-hatred or whatever, or more comparison, like our husband talking about, like, I'm not that bad, could be worse, like, but I feel like I got to this point where I was like, I am already losing so much by hiding, and so can I get to this point where I can, like, trust God that He is who He says He is, that He is kind, like His kindness would lead me towards repentance, like, can I trust that? And I feel like I just got to a point where I was like, I lose, or maybe lose-win, and so I'm gonna like see, and so I think for me it was like choosing trusted people to like disclose the fullness of immorality and just brokenness of my behavior. And then I realized, like, oh, the power of shame is actually broken, and I don't have to continue choosing to hide. I have another choice when I feel shame, and it's honesty and confession. And then I get to receive forgiveness instead of more awful imprisonment, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, so many layers. And it's not like one and done. It's like this constant.
I feel like that's almost what makes it. It's like almost like shame begets shame or something, where then all of a sudden you like feel shame about having shame or whatever else, or like the same thing pops up and you're like, not this again, you know? And then you like have shame for the fact that it's still like something that impacts you. Because I don't know, I guess maybe I just tend to put that on myself of like, but I still think I can fix it, instead of inviting God in to be like, help me, like I'm broken and I need help.
If I were to be fully known, there's no way I could be fully loved. I love that Allie said that, because it is such a, it's a like a punch to the gut, because it's such a true statement. And I wonder how many of us have spent years believing and living out of that very overpowering lie. Because not always, and as we go forward with this series, we're going to look at the different ways that shame can manifest itself in our lives. But more times than not, shame is the result of sin. And either it's the product of our own poor choices, of our own sin, or it enslaves us when we've been on the receiving end, like we've become the dumping ground of somebody else's sin. And so however it ends up transpiring in our lives, we are going to either experience our shame privately or publicly. And so when it happens privately, it's happening behind closed doors. Nobody else knows that it's happening, but you know, like you're aware, you're fully aware of it. And it can be, you know, abuse from a spouse or a parent or a sibling. It can be, you know, like Allie shared, it can be an eating disorder, something that can be concealed, you know, behind the walls and of your home or of a bathroom. It can be a drug or a drinking problem that you have just mastered hiding. Or it can be a porn or sex addiction that you participate in behind locked doors. But when it happens publicly, it's on display for everybody to see, right? And for everybody to know about. There's nothing hidden about it. And it can look like, you know, if you've been having an affair and you've been found out, if you are going through a divorce and maybe this divorce is, you know, it's a really nasty divorce and you're just being smeared, you know, left and right all over the place. Or maybe you are, you know, you've been fired, or you've lost your own company because of fraud or misconduct. Or, you know, maybe you have been a teenager, you know, who got pregnant. Like, no matter what it is, if it's concealed or exposed, shame is going to torment us. Okay, it is going to torment us, and it blocks us from grace and from deliverance. So what we are going to do for the next 2 weeks, we are going to dig into 2 stories, all right, that are in the Bible. One of these stories demonstrates private shame. It really does show what happens when our shame is you know, takes place behind closed doors. And then the other one is going to look more at, you know, public shame, like when you are just put out there and you cannot hide at all. And so both of these stories are about women, okay? And both of them have to do with sexual sin. And so one of them is a woman who chooses to engage in sexual immorality on her own. She made that choice. And another one is about a woman who is the victim of rape. And so there's 2 things that I want to discuss before we get into the stories. And the first thing is this, is that rape is a hideous and a horrendous act of violence. Okay, the Bible does not promote it. It does not condone it. God is very much against rape, okay? So I just want that to be laid out and put out there so that we know there's never a point in time when rape is okay, when a woman deserves it, nothing like that whatsoever. Okay, so if any of you ladies have endured sexual abuse in any way, shape, or form, I just want you to know ahead of time about the nature of the content in Tamar's story that we're going to be looking at. And so while both of these stories revolve around sexual sin, okay, the second thing is this, is that shame is not only something that you experience in sexual immorality. It doesn't only happen when sexual immorality takes place. And again, we'll look more into the different, factors that can contribute to shame. And not all of us, okay, have sexual sin or immorality in our history or in our present. I understand that. And that's okay, because our focus is on shame. It's on the feeling and the experiencing of shame itself. The focus is not on what transpired to produce it. So really what it comes down to is that the reality of shame is this. If we do not do anything about it, all right, if we do not place our shame at the feet of Jesus and ask him for his help, it will not go anywhere, because shame has a permanency about it. Shame does not move, or shame does not leave us unless we have sought help for it, unless we have done something to help be delivered from our shame. So what we're going to do, we are going to start off, I'm not going to read the stories in their entirety. I'm just going to read to a certain point, and then we'll have instructions on what we need to do throughout the week with the stories. But I am going to begin in John, okay, in chapter 8, and this is when Jesus encounters an adulterous woman. So we're starting in John chapter 8, verse 1. It says, "But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, 'Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?' They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him." So we're going to stop there with that one. So here you go. You have this woman who has made a decision. She has, by her own choice, by her own sin, she has committed, adultery. She was found sleeping with somebody who was not her husband. And these men planned this. Like, they knew that this was going to happen. They've probably been watching her, and they go in and they catch her and they pull her out, probably caught in the act, and they bring her before Jesus. And Jesus, it says, he's at the temple courts. And so where all the people are gathered around him, and they show up with this woman, and here she is put on display in front of Jesus and all the people gathered around him, and her sin is being proclaimed to everybody. She cannot hide it. It is a public disgrace. So that's where I want us to kind of rest right there. Then we're going to go to Tamar's story, which we're going to find in the Old Testament, and we're going to be in 2 Samuel. And we're going to start, it's going to be chapter 13. We're going to start in verse 1. And it says, "In the course of time, Amnon, son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David." So Amnon is in love with his half-sister. "Amnon became frustrated to the point of illness on account of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. Now Amnon had a friend named Jonadab, I think that's his name, son of Shimeah, David's brother. In other words, this is his cousin, okay? This is Amnon's cousin, Jonadab. All right, Jonadab was a very shrewd man. He asked Amnon, 'Why do you, the king's son, look so haggard morning after morning? Won't you tell me?' Amnon said to him, 'I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister.' 'Go to bed and pretend to be ill,' Jonadab said. 'When your father comes to see you, say to him, I would like my sister Tamar to come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare the food in my sight, so I may watch her and then eat it from her hand.' So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. When the king came to see him, Amnon said to him, I would like my sister Tamar to come and make some special bread in my sight, so I may eat from her hand. David sent word to Tamar at the palace, go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare some food for him. So Tamar went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was lying down. She took some dough, kneaded it, made the bread in his sight, and baked it. Then she took the pan and served him the bread, but he refused to eat. Send everyone out of here, Amnon said, so everyone left him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food here into my bedroom so I may eat from your hand. And Tamar took the bread she had prepared and brought it to her brother Amnon in his bedroom. But when she took it to him to eat, he grabbed her and said, come to bed with me, my sister. So I'm going to end that one right there. And I want you to read the rest of Tamar's story. It's 2 Samuel chapter 13, and it's verses 1, and I want you to read through to verse 22. And that's the entirety of the story. But I want you to read this on your own. I want you to be able to sit down in a place where you can be quiet, where you can read it and really take it all in because of the kinds of questions that we're going to answer throughout the week. So what I want us to do with these two stories, in particular with Tamar's story, is after you read these, I just want you to sit and think about these stories. And the very first question that I want you to answer is, I want you to put to words, okay, the emotions that you are feeling after reading Tamar's story and the woman caught in adultery. So write those down and be very honest about how you feel. You can, I have from when I have done this already, I wrote down after Tamar's story, like I was angry. I felt angst. I was shocked. I was sad. Like it was just all those different things. There was a lot of emotions that went through. Write them down. And again, just be honest with them. It's okay. Nobody's going to be looking over these. The second question to answer is this. What actions did Tamar take, okay, that demonstrated her shame? After everything happens, you're gonna get, it's gonna be pretty descriptive about what she does, how she responds to all of that. And I want you to go through and I want you to write those actions down. What did she do that demonstrated that she was just completely full of shame? And then the third thing is, can you recall a time when you have felt overwhelming shame? Okay, so I had shared during the discussion portion of this video how the moment when I had cheated on my husband back when I was 21 years old, the first time that I was married, that there was an overwhelming amount of shame that came over me. And I remember leaving, the place that I was at, and I was walking home, and they don't call it the walk of shame for no reason. I mean, it was basically like my literal walk of shame. And as I was walking, like my physical body, I was shaking. Like I couldn't control myself. I was shaking and my heart was racing. I felt lightheaded. I almost felt like I was going to pass out. Like it was a lot. My body was responding to the shame in a very tangible way. So if you can, think of those moments, in that moment when shame just came over you, like just took over your body in a wave, how did your body respond to that? Can you describe those physical reactions? And then not only that, but what were some of the thoughts that were running through your mind? Were you like Tamar? Were you thinking that you were ruined? What if you're this woman caught in adultery and you are standing before a group of people, a crowd of people, and you don't know if you're going to be stoned to death? Like you don't know what's going to happen. What are the thoughts that are going through your mind? So that's what I want us to do. And I want us this week to just stay here with these women in that very uncomfortable, unnerving place of shame. Okay. And I want us to stay here with these women with our own experiences, because we need to have that relatability and to know like, oh, I get it. I so get what she's feeling and what she's experiencing. I know that, from my own experience as well. So that's what we want to do for this week. And then next week, we're going to look at what is our natural inclination when we face shame? Okay, because that, and I'm sure we probably all know, is to run and hide. So we're going to look at we're going to contrast the two stories of what happens, with Tamar versus what happens with the woman caught in adultery. And we're going to look at basically like the rest of their lives, what happens to each one of them. So that's where we're gonna land for this week. And ladies, if you have any questions, always you can reach out. You can get in touch with us. And just remember, we always launch our videos on Monday mornings at 9 a.m. Mountain Time. And you can find us here on YouTube. You can find us on iTunes, on Stitcher, and I think Spotify is the other one. And then also we are on Instagram. You can come and find In the Becoming on our Instagram page, where we just post, it's more of just the social media outlet that we have. So thank you, ladies, so much for joining us. We will see you next week, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.